Well, good morning, everybody. Nice to see so many people here, and welcome to those of you that are on Zoom. I just want to thank Krista Campbell for inviting the Wild Ones to the speaker series this morning. We're really glad to be here. Also, a thank you to our president of the local Wild Ones chapter, Jennifer Geiger, for all the hard work that she does. We really do appreciate everything that Jennifer does. But a special thanks to my husband, John, for his most gorgeous photos, but especially for his undying support and for taking this journey with me. So just a little bit about myself, a little bit of background. I am a lifelong gardener. I concentrate mainly on garden design and plants. I've taken a lot of horticulture classes at Morrisville College and just about any class that I can take. This morning, I'm going to talk to you about the power of compassionate landscape. Did I tell you who I am? Maggie Reilly. So I just a little bit more background. I grew up north where I learned to love the land. Our backyard was a huge vegetable garden and strawberry patch. And just beyond that were the banks of the Racket River that were lined in a woodland forest where I spent many hours of my childhood. I remember my mother would say to me, now Mag, this was in the spring, don't be going out there and picking those little pink and white flowers. She was talking about the trilliums because she said, if you do, there'll be no more of them. So that was my first introduction to threatened and endangered species. And from there, I went to Clarkson College, which was just up the road from us. And I studied environmental engineering. And now I work on channel and floodplain restoration projects where we use only native plants. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So John and I live in New York Mills, where we are transitioning our extensive gardens on our little suburban lot over to native plants. But before I get started, I want to recognize that we are on the Oneida lands of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy here in Clinton, New York. So let's get started. So who are the Wild Ones? We are a national organization that preserves biodiversity. And how do we do that? We do that through preservation, restoration, and the establishment of native plant communities. The Mohawk Valley chapter, which is your local chapter, we focus on education, having fun, and a sense of community. You're going to hear me talk today about having a relationship with the land, but we also have relationships with each other. We gardeners and plant enthusiasts really have a deep relationship, and we have a passion that we share. We're in each other's gardens, helping each other out, working on something bigger than ourselves. And those deep relationships are something that mean a great deal to us. You know, gardening and friendship, you know, are just good food for the soul. So, and who at this stage of their life wouldn't want to be in a group called the Wild Ones? So, you know, so we picked that picture right there, photo, appropriately for this slide. It's wild bergamot. That's Monarda fistuloso. And that little hummer coming in for a landing, that's a hummer moth coming in for a landing. That is a beautiful plant, but it is also a pollinator magnet. So just a summary of what I'm going to go over today. So if we're talking about compassionate landscapes, then who takes care of it but the compassionate gardener? We're also talking about using native plants in our suburban lots to create a conservation corridor. And then I say lawns gone wild or not so wild. The nickname for our Mohawk Valley chapter is Lawns Gone Wild. So, but we want to break that myth that using native plants means that it's messy. So I talk about using traditional garden design techniques, but using native plants. And then I'll take questions and hopefully have a few answers for you. So who is that compassionate gardener? A little bit of a hint there, stewards of the land. So what does it mean to be compassionate? You're like, my goodness, didn't we come to a gardening talk, not a sociology class? But compassion is that feeling that when you see someone or something suffering, you want to alleviate. It's that action, that feeling that makes you want to do something to alleviate that someone or something of their suffering. And why do you want to do that? Because they matter to us. Whether you know them or not, they matter to you. So that's what compassion is to me. And Thomas Merton said, basically, compassion is that interdependence of all living things, and we are obviously a part of a big whole. So we'll start off with compassion, and then to go on to the compassionate gardener. Compassionate gardeners feel that responsibility for protecting, caring for, and preserving what we call the land. Aldo Leopold was one of the first people to talk about a land ethic. He also talked about how we harm the land because society has that sovereign ownership of the land. And so we need to stop abusing the land because we think we own it, and start belonging to a community that we are part of ourselves that will love and respect the land. So we need to go back to what the indigenous people did and do. But to go back to that community that we consider the land, what is that community? Granted, yes, it is the soil, but it is also the water. It's the air we breathe. It's all the plants and all the animals. So when we talk about the land, it is not just that soil. So who is that compassionate gardener? The inspiration for my talk today came from a book I read by Benjamin Vogt, A New Garden Ethic. And Benjamin Vogt is a leader in this transforming suburban lots to native plant gardens. And his book goes way beyond just a gardening book. He talks about healing the land, developing a relationship with the land. And while you're healing the land, you're also healing yourself. That's that defiant compassion. You can see that's his front lawn right there. And he definitely lives in suburbia, but he has converted his whole lawn. And his business is Monarch Gardens, and he is a leader in this. But let's go back to who that compassionate gardener is. They see all species equal and essential. You've heard about walking another man's shoes. Well, how about being in another species' wings? We fight for those marginalized species that might be suffering and going extinct. And we stand up for those who can't speak for themselves, and that is the flora and fauna. So for those of you who do know me, know that I'm a climate activist. So here we go. We're going to become ecological activists right along with it. And does not that tie together very well? So that compassionate gardener develops a deep, caring, but a reciprocating relationship with nature. And how do you develop a relationship like that? If you had a relationship with a person like that, you would need to be with them. So we need to get back to nature. We need to stop conquering the land and becoming that respecting member so that we respect and love the land as the indigenous people did. I really like this photo or picture and this quote, because it does remind me of when I was up on the Racket River. For the forest said nothing, it just let her breathe. So here's where we need to get back to nature. Another one of John's gorgeous photos. And so we need that reciprocating relationship with the land. We need to get back to it so we can develop that relationship. My mother used to say, Meg, take only what you need and give back a little bit more than you take. So that's going to be our theme for our compassionate gardening. So another Aldo Leopold quote, our ability to perceive quality in nature begins, as in art, with the pretty. It expands through successive stages of the beautiful to values as yet uncaptured by language. You're going to hear some of these native garden, native plant people talk about going beyond pretty and rethink pretty. And I think this is the reason why John and I are transitioning our gardens to native plants, because we want our gardens to have value. We want them, yes, to be beautiful, but we want them to be able to support life of future generations of all species. And another one of John's most gorgeous photos. So that's why we're transitioning our gardens to native plants. And so if we were to have a garden talk, we would have, that's about native plants, we would have to talk about Douglas Tallamy, because he is the guiding light and the leader of this native plant movement. And I really do think it is a movement. He said, as gardeners and stewards of our land, we have never been so empowered, and the ecological stakes have never been so high. He wrote a book called Bringing Nature Home, and that is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to create conservation corridors, and we are going to bring nature home. He also wrote a book, Nature's Best Hope, and Greta Thunberg, a young climate activist, said, once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Then and only then hope will come. And I really do have hope, but hope without action is just a wish. So what are we going to do as compassionate gardeners? We are going to turn our suburban little lots into conservation corridors. We're going to plant native plants, and every single native plant, every single native garden, no matter how small it is, matters, and it makes a difference. So just to go over a few definitions before I start, here's the teacher in me. I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about, but just so that we're all on the same page, what is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is an interacting community of living organisms in a certain physical environment. It functions as a unit, but it is also in a given place. Like, well, that's a lot to remember. And Doug Tallamy says that operative word is interacting. It could be a bog, it could be a forest, it could be our pine barrens, maybe a wet meadow. But it is that interacting community in a certain environment and at a certain place. And that spider web gets me into the next definition of biodiversity. You see all the little pieces, all the different species. If we lose one or two or three, which I wouldn't want to be the one or two or three, but we will, if we lose too many, then you're going to get what people refer to as an ecosystem collapse. So let's go to biodiversity. Basically, what's biodiversity? It's the variety of life on Earth, from a genetic level all the way to the ecosystem level. But I really want to talk about a little bit about that genetic diversity. You can have genetic diversity even within a species. And the reason that is so beneficial with these native plants is it makes it so that they can adapt. You'll hear us talk about, well, I'll get that in a minute. So biodiversity, if you look at that photo, that is our backyard. Some of you have spent time there. We have removed a lot of our non-native plants at that location and replaced them with native plants. So it's biologically beneficial. I do still have some non-natives. You can see that broadleafed hosta there, but some gardening techniques, I've used a lot of different textures. The fine texture of that iris with the hosta, many different textures through there, layering, a lot of different layers. There's a lot of different colors, different forms. So while it's got a lot of biodiversity, I think it's also aesthetically pleasing. So what is a native species? A native species, we're going to talk mainly about plants, but they have evolved in a given place over a period of time so that it has developed a complex and essential relationship with the other organisms in that physical environment. So we're going to talk mainly about native species. You're gonna, I can't go over all different terms, but you're gonna hear sometimes what a cultivar is. What a cultivar is it's been introduced by humans. So it is not native, but when I talked about that genetic diversity in a species with the native plants, cultivars are like clones. They're all identical. They cannot adapt. So you'll hear me say that I want to go with straight species. So I'm talking about straight species of the native plants. That one right there is a smooth hydrangea, and it likes shade, but if it gets a little bit more sun, it'll bloom more. The leaves will turn a little limey. The other three that I have are in the shade, but still thriving. If that was a cultivar, next to, so I will be putting all the Latin names and the common names. You might see, well, you would see in a cultivar in parentheses another name. So that's when you know you've got a cultivar. So another type of native plant or a different category of native plant are what we call keystone plants. And they are very critical to the food web. They're necessary for a species to go through the completion of their life cycle. So to that pollinator, these keystone plants are extremely critical. Without them, butterflies, birds wouldn't thrive. As I say here, 96% of terrestrial birds rely on insects supported by those keystone plants. And this keystone plant, the serviceberry, is one of my favorites. The reason I like it is I like its habit. It's multi-stemmed, it's airy, you can see through it. If you prune it, you can walk under it. It blooms in the spring. It's got gorgeous color in the fall. It's got berries for the wildlife. Really nice plant. This is a nice design. They've repeated the serviceberries, as you can see, but I would just add more plants, of course. And what I might do from a design standpoint is where you see all that mulch, I might put in a dark green sedge, like maybe a Pennsylvania sedge. Where you see the green grass, I might put 2 or 3 species at the most, maybe 2 ferns and maybe a whitewood aster. But a very nice design. But I might add some more plants, of course. So another discussion on keystone plants, a couple different types. You'll hear people talk about host plants. They basically feed the young caterpillars of about 90% of our butterflies and moths, which we call the Lepidopterus. The other type of keystone plant is plants that feed the specialist bees. That means that specialist bee needs that keystone plant to survive. And if a keystone plant is feeding the specialist bees, they're also feeding the generalist bees. And you can see here the northern red oak, Doug Tallamy's most favorite plant, the oak. John and I actually just, and they do sport a lot of caterpillars. John and I just planted one of these because we lost one of our large trees. The reason I picked it was this plant is native from Quebec all the way down to Florida. And so I figured with climate change coming or here, this would be a great plant. Also, that goes back to that diversity of the genetics. It's an oak from Quebec all the way to Florida, but the one in South Carolina isn't probably the one I'm going to plant here. So that is what our keystone plants are doing. Oh, our invasive plants. So these are the, oh, I hear some moans and groans out there. So these are the non-native plants that have not established that deep relationship with organisms in that ecosystem. And because of that, they have no predators here. And that allows them to become very invasive. They outcompete our natives. This one that you see right here, the Japanese knotweed, on our stream projects, this is a really tough one because the seeds get into the stream, float downstream. Our banks are usually eroded. Those seeds take hold and phew, we've got that Japanese knotweed everywhere. And what happens is it is so invasive, it creates a monoculture. I'm sure in the fall, if you've driven across the stream and you go, oh, that's beautiful. When us native gardeners look at it, we're like, oh, that is not beautiful because it is a monoculture. It's altered the ecosystem and basically your biodiversity is gone. So that is Japanese knotweed. If you do have invasives at home, like John's favorite, the bishop's weed, I would not allow it to flower. If you can't get it all out, I would not allow it to flower. Cut it off. Don't let it go to seed because that's how it'll spread. So everybody knows that native plants provide for the native pollinators. They provide 15 to 35 times the caterpillar biomass. Basically, they're bird food. They support many native bee species. And of course, if we're going to increase the amount of native plants, we're going to increase the number of pollinators that we need. The next one is very important. They do provide nectar and pollen for the parent and young, but what a native plant does that a non-native plant does not do is they provide the pollen. And that is what the parents need to feed their young. So that's very important. And of course, if we plant a lot of native plants, we're going to increase the habitat, and that is going to give an area for the pollinators to nest, to mate, and to have shelter. So I picked this photo, the butterfly weed. It is in the family of the milkweed. I picked it because it has that monarch caterpillar on there, where we have had a lot of monarch caterpillars on our butterfly weed in the last few years. There's also a bee on the right-hand side there, right on the orange flower. But I also picked it because it has the pods that have all those aphids on there. And so one day I went out, they had all the aphids on there, and then the next day I went out and they were gone. So remember that ecosystem, that interacting living organisms, don't worry about that. We need insects, we need bugs. So your ecosystem, if it's healthy, will take care of itself. So who's the real deal here? Who's the plant that is actually supplying the pollen? And I'm sure the gardeners in the room are like, oh, I know that. I do have to confess that I have both of those plants in the garden, which means I have a non-native. The red cardinal flower on the left is with our obedient plant. And the one on the right, the Lucifer lily, who is enticing that ruby-throated hummingbird that I sat for hours to get that picture. And we have had a lot of hummingbirds in the last couple of years. So who's the real deal? I'm sure you know. I'm going to see if I can get this to work. It is the co-evolved hummingbird along with that cardinal plant. And if you look at his head and on his forehead, the male reproductive organ is putting pollen as he sticks his bill in there on his forehead. And then when he goes to the female part of the plant and sticks his head in there, he is actually pollinating that plant. So majorly cool, isn't it? Yeah, this is, I'm chattering, I think. Isn't that cool? So the bird's head's touching the flower and put the pollen on it. There you go. Okay, sorry, can't stay. Okay, so native pollinators provide for all. Without it, we wouldn't have a habitable earth. So they supply support on which we all depend. But sometimes you're going to hear humans say, well, yes, of course, because we need it for our food. But we need it for more than just our food. We need it for the food for all animals. So on the right there, you're going to see a shrubby St. John's wort. Again, another one of my favorite plants. It is about 3 to 4 feet in diameter and 3 to 4 feet high. It is one of those tidier native plants, so you might want to use it in your front yard. It stays with those little yellow flowers for an extremely long period of time once it blooms, and it is covered in bees. So another really nice plant. It's biologically beneficial, but also it's aesthetically very, very pleasing. So anything else we wanted to say about that? Okay, so now the engineer is going to come out of me and talk about how native plants are more resilient. And why are they more resilient? Because they have such deep root systems. That's why we use them on our stream projects. And what they do is they slow the stormwater runoff down. They allow it to infiltrate into the ground. And the other thing they do, those roots are so deep, they stabilize a slope, land on a slope, and they don't allow for any erosion. So how does that help downstream in your watershed? Because if we keep that water on site, we'll have less water, less erosion, and it will be going slower, just what all engineers want. And so native plants also sequester carbon. So we're fighting climate change on a larger scale. The next one I'm going to talk about is right now, you got to think it's that co-evolved relationship. So our native bloomers and our native pollinators come out at the same time. They're in sync, I say for now. And so that's all, you know, they've adapted to our regional climate. I'll talk about climate change in a minute. The other really big thing why native plants are more resilient, they do not require pesticides or fertilizers. No native gardener uses pesticides. Native nurseries do not use pesticides. If you go to what I call a traditional nursery, you need to ask if they use pesticides because that's extremely important. You use pesticides, they will get into it systemically, and those pollinators are gone. Native plants require less water. Maybe in the first few years to get those deep roots established, they'll need some watering. But once they are established, you really don't need to water them. Two of my very favorite plants, mountain mint is that gray one up on the left-hand corner there. That one I have right on a walkway. I have it all over the place, but I have it on a walkway, and the bees, there's this blue hornet that goes on it. That's gorgeous. You could stick your hand in that and they will not come after you. A, they don't all sting, and B, they're getting exactly what they want and need off that mountain mint. So that is a really nice plant. If you're a starter, I would start with that one too. And then blue mist flower, that's a wild ageratum that gets teeny little blue flowers all over it. And you could actually use that as a ground cover. Two very nice, biologically beneficial, but very nice native plants. So I really like this slide. Look at the roots on that. You know, it's great above, but it's great below as well. Those roots are deep. For some of you, we could get into, you know, the sociology of plants more, you know, and what those roots are doing beneath the ground. But if that land were on a slope, those roots would hold that land on a slope, no erosion. The ones above, slow it down, let it infiltrate. And look at that little puny turf grass over on the left. And that thing is puny. It has no roots, so that's not going to stabilize any soil. It has nothing above it, so it doesn't slow any water down. And you pulverize it with pesticides and fertilizers. So if you were on a slope, it would wash all that fertilizer and pesticides, wash downstream, go into your watershed, pollute it, pollute your drinking water. So we're going to replace all that turf grass. So why are we doing all this? because our native pollinators are in decline. And why are they in decline? Because we have lost and or fragmented the habitat in which they need to live to thrive and survive. Also, we have so many native plants and invasive plants. We have less pollinators. Again, that pesticide use, neonics, we do not want them. Make sure you ask your nurseries if they use any pesticides at all. Climate change, these plants can't adapt to climate change because it's happening so fast. That means if that pollinator needs that plant and it's not there, then it is going to go extinct. And you can go onto the IUCN website and see the status of the health of the world's biodiversity. And who do we use as a poster child for pollinator decline but the monarch butterfly? Right there, they're feeding on either our Joe Pye weed or our milkweed. And we've had a lot more monarchs than normal these past few years. We see them feeding on our plants, you know, eye level, but we also see them up in the top of our river birch, which is so majorly cool. So I talk about native gardens being more resilient to climate change. Climate change is happening at such a rapid pace. It is very unpredictable. Some people talk about plant migration. I am not going to recommend anything like that until I see the science behind it. So what am I going to do as a compassionate native gardener? I'm going to plant a lot, and I'm going to plant densely so that we have successive blooms from early spring all the way to late fall. And we want to plant native corridors so that we can have those pollinator pathways. The other thing I want to mention, as a tree lover and as an engineer and as a person doing these native plants, wanting to keep our pollinators, you need to preserve your forests. Plant a tree. If you do nothing else on your suburban lot, plant an oak, plant a maple, plant a birch, that understory serviceberry. We need trees. So plant a tree today for tomorrow. The reason I use that common witch hazel is because it is an early bloomer for the pollinators in early spring. So plant a native tree. She's on this tree thing. So deforestation isn't happening just in the Amazon. It is happening here in Oneida County. It's probably happening right here in the town in which you live. We need to do something about that. And then we need to also plant our native trees. On May 15th of this past year, 1.5 million birds, migratory birds, flew over Oneida County. Granted, that's the peak day, but think of that. They can't go forever. They need a forest, and they need to be able to land on something, rest, get food. We need to preserve our forests. I think I covered that. Plant a tree. So I talked about why are we doing this, and I think that is extremely important, sometimes maybe more important than the how. But now I'll go on to that controlled chaos. Nancy Lawson calls using native plants in our garden controlled chaos. So I'll get into traditional garden design a bit. So that's what we see now as the American lawn, just waiting to be planted with native plants. We have millions of acres of that in the United States. So just think, if we could convert that over to native plants, the conservation corridor that we would have less pesticides, less fertilizer, less pollution. We would have obviously more space for our native plants, more carbon being sequestered, less maintenance because you don't have to water. And we would have improved habitat, biodiversity, ecosystem. Land was meant to have plants on it. It was not meant to have that on it. And so what are we going to do? We are going to restore the habitat. We're going to restore that relationship with the land. We're going to heal the land, heal ourselves. We're going to give back what we've taken. We're going to create and regenerate habitat. We're going to give the pollinators the food, the water, the cover, and a place for them to raise their young. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace all that lifeless lawn with native plants. And when we do that, we're going to use the native plants to our ecoregion. We are ecoregion 83. That is the Great Lakes and Lower Hudson lowlands. And you're like, well, I don't know what native plants are in that ecoregion. Don't worry. You're going to have more websites given to you. You can go on to the New York Plant Atlas. It's wonderful. Jennifer has resources for you. You're also just going to check on your phone. There's a couple really nice websites. But what we're going to do, if you look at that photo, that is a photo from Adam Woodruff. He's got some gorgeous designs using all native plants. He has turned his front yard there into a conservation corridor. And we're going to do the same thing as Compassionate Gardeners, and we are going to bring nature home. So for those of you who have been to our home, that is our backyard. And what we want to do, a little controlled chaos. But what we want to do is we want to change the mindset. We want to tell people that native gardens are not overgrown, that American lawn, as Nancy Lawson says, is undergrown. It is lifeless. Native plants are not weeds. Insects and bees, they are our friends, not our foes. And don't do your fall cleanup like you do spring cleanup in the house. Leave your leaves, leave your leaves. But what we want to do to get that controlled chaos is we want to have an intentional design. We want it so that your neighbors do accept it. Because as much as all of us are going to create those native gardens in our suburban lot, we need them to do the same thing. So we need to kind of try and entice the neighbors to do the same thing that we're doing, because the more we have, the better the conservation corridor. And I do believe that aesthetic, ecological garden does not have to look messy or weedy. So that right there, we have taken out a lot of non-natives right there. Some of you have my non-natives, like my hostas, that you're using for deer bait, or you're planting yourself. I know who's there. I have taken those out and put those white blooming plethora right there. I've used annuals for color, taken out a lot of the non-natives. I've got pagoda dogwoods, red twig dogwoods, silky dogwoods, gray dogwoods, 3 service berries in there, low growth sumac, bush honeysuckle. Tried to use garden techniques with different color, texture, form. So a little controlled chaos. John even said, get those things out of the walkway. They're not even native. So those are gone, a little more controlled. So biologically beneficial, but hopefully aesthetically pleasing. So you're going to hear cues to care. What does that mean to have cues to care? A little more intentional design. It's going to the humans to make sure they see that, oh yeah, this is a place for us too. You'll have seats, you'll have bird baths, pots, sculptures. Those are cues to care, to show, you know, it's for us too. If you're going to entice your neighbors, try to have that front lawn welcoming, a little more enticing, maybe a little more neat and tidy. I'll say that some people say, keep your plants at 3 feet. I have not followed that rule, but I think it's still welcoming. I would still have flowering native flowers and shrubs, maybe that shrubby St. John's wort, but maybe a little more well-behaved in the front lawn. Wildlife is still going to use native plants, even if it is designed in a traditional fashion. So Rachel, this is your front lawn right here in Clinton, New York, one of our members of the Wild Ones. And so what do we have to do to get started? Obviously, we have to reduce that turf grass. The way we do it is we put newspaper or cardboard down. We then put mulch or organic material on top of it. I like to preserve, a lot of people are like, get that grass out of there, but I like to preserve that top layer because it has a lot of nutrients in it. I do not use chemicals and I don't own a rototiller. And then obviously we have to remove our invasive plants. I do also want to mention that native garden designers are really needed because traditional landscapers don't use native plants. So we really need some native garden designers, right, Jennifer? So this is Rachel's beautiful butterfly garden. And what did she do to start? We had to do a site analysis. You have to see, do you have sun? Do you have shade? Is your clay soil, sandy soil? Do you have any environmental problems, drainage? She had to decide, how do you want to use your space and what kind of style do you like? Obviously, she wanted a butterfly garden. She has a little more cottagey garden feel here. You need to take an inventory of your existing plants. Some of them can stay, some of them are native and some have to go. Maybe you want to add something extra like a water feature. Rachel used some cues to care here. She used that beautiful arbor. She also has put some window boxes that match on her house. She's got her signs there. Very nice, well-designed, ecologically beneficial, but also aesthetically very beautiful. So when you're doing this, let your design juices flow. Enjoy yourself. Don't worry too much as long as you've taken everything into account. So relationship of plant to place again. One thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to research your native plants. I don't know the native plants as well as I know my traditional plants. So you need to know what size they're going to get to be, what shape they are, how do they spread. But the one thing I want to really bring home is you need to choose your plant for your site. I've heard a lot of people say, I want that plant. I'm like, you can't have that plant because it won't live on your site. So you just have to accept where you are and what you've got. And if you do combinations in nature, nature-based combinations, they're battle tested, the more success you'll have. So start with native plant communities. This is another Adam Woodruff design. He's on a walkway here. He's kept things lower. He's also got beautiful color. And I'll talk a little bit more of his design, but a really beautiful and biologically beneficial design there. So I keep talking about a plant community. What is a plant community? It's basically plants that get along with each other. They have to survive in the same environmental condition. So if you've got a wet condition, they all have to survive in a wet condition. They also have to get along from a competitive standpoint. You can't have one plant that's really competitive and one that gives in. Otherwise, that competitive plant will take over the whole site. This one's in our backyard. These are Joe Pye weed, ironweed, milkweed. I've got coneflower in there. They all pretty much pull and tug. They get along with each other. Nobody's more competitive than the other. And they all like the site that they're at. So that's basically plant community. But don't forget, choose your plant. Don't change your site. Okay, lots of reasons to take a walk in the woods, get back to nature. But also, if you take a walk in the woods, you can see how nature actually designs their landscape. And that's what you want to do, is basically do what nature does. Plant in layers. We are really big about planting in layers. It is going to make you feel like you're in a bigger place than you actually are. Gives dimension. So start with I always talk about the bones of your design. Start with those large canopy trees, sequestering carbon, making it cooler. Your understory trees provide the food. Then the larger shrubs that are going to give wildlife habitat. Then you're going to do the herbaceous flowers that give you your color and texture all year, even though I know that's where you want to start. And And then you're gonna use plugs maybe for ground cover, and that's your green mulch. So John, no more truckloads of mulch. That's where I want to concentrate this year, is using ground covers to cover that ground. Granted, we need to leave some open space for seeds and the bees, but need to use a ground cover. Also, don't forget your vines. That trumpet honeysuckle, no, not trumpet, the honeysuckle vine, the orange one, is native. They add height and they add interest. That is actually a picture from the New York Highline. So really like this slide too, the art of layering both above and below again. You're gonna plant a diverse, dense landscape. You're gonna have color, texture. Focal points can be plants that vary in the season. You're gonna have blooms all year from that seasonal theme layer, and you're gonna have vertical layering. Structural layer, the bigger plants, seasonal, those blooming herbaceous, and then that ground cover that is that large biomass on the bottom there. So design with intention. You're going to repeat color, you repeat shape, form, texture, and as you can see in this front yard design of Adam Woodruff's, it really makes your eye flow. We like to plant flowers in drifts and in masses by odd numbers, 3, 5. And the reason we do that isn't just for the human eye, but also the pollinators. They need a large area to light. So if you have larger drifts, they can light there, stay, get that pollen they need, and they're not flitting around using up all their energy. Bloom in succession, like I said, early spring to late fall. You can have a focal point. He has a most elegant focal point right there, but it could be plants. Year-long interest. If you notice, he's only using maybe like 3 different colors there of bloom. That is kind of like a little guidance. The texture he's used, he's got the grasses in there along with the other clump-like form. So he's definitely designed to scale. He framed his view with the tree and the structure. That is a very elegant design and very ecologically beneficial. So this is on the left-hand side, there is a summary of all the things that I've kind of gone over this morning. So make sure you actually enjoy yourself doing this. But on the right there, I want to tell a story about how Jennifer has created habitat. She has regenerated and restored an ecosystem, and she has created and regenerated biodiversity in her little suburban yard in Rome, New York. Jennifer lives right in the city, and we were somewhere, and Jennifer says, Maggie, I gotta go. I go, oh, where are you going? She goes, I gotta go pick up a truck, a U-Haul. I said, oh, is someone moving? No, I'm going to the Plantsman to pick up some native plants. That is a nursery near Ithaca. And I'm like, this woman is picking up plants in a U-Haul truck. That's who I want to hang around with. So I said, well, why do you need so many plants, Jennifer? So Jennifer has in the back of her yard, I think it's like 70 by 80 feet. It was I'll call it a wooded area that was infested with invasives. But Jennifer had a lot of determination and she had a vision. She said the first thing she needs to do is remove those invasive plants. Jennifer removed 7 Norway maples, mature Norway maples. She also removed honeysuckle and garlic mustard and vinca vine and bishop's weed. So that was in May of 2020, just as the pandemic was starting, that Jennifer removed the invasives. So this is a story about an ever-evolving compassionate garden. Jennifer created a woodland in her backyard. So I asked her, can I come and look at this? She had in September of 2020 planted small native plants, and that's what we want to do because we want to allow those roots to develop. They don't get stunted when they're small. A lot of people want to buy a big tree and put it in, but that tree takes a lot. That gets stunted and that's harder on the tree. So Jennifer said to me, I said, can I come over? She said, sure. So I went over in late 2020 and she goes, how do you like it? I'm like, it's beautiful. You've designed it wonderfully. She goes, yes, and it's going to be so lush next spring. And I thought, oh my God, this poor woman thinks this stick garden is going to turn into this lush, beautiful garden in no time. Well, I went back in June of 2021 and look, it really is a lush, beautiful garden that did not take long to take off. Those roots got established. She's got on the left-hand side there, flowering dogwood. She's done, planted all of those plants. She's got 2 paths going in. She's got 2 archways that have flowering native vines on them. And the stick garden is definitely gone. So here is Jennifer's woodland garden. On the left is October of 2022. And you can definitely take a walk in the woods. You go on a hot summer day, standing outside of this in the suburban lot, you know, hot, you walk in underneath that arbor and it's like you have been transported to a whole different place. On such a small lot, Jennifer has created a welcoming woodland. The temperature is lower. You look around and you think you are in this huge forest. She has densely planted. She is planted in layers. She has picked perfect plants for the perfect place. It is a wonderful woodland garden. And on the right-hand side, you can see she's added more stone to outline that garden. Your eye flows. She's got layers. She's got different colors, used different textures. I have to say that this is a truly compassionate woodland garden, and Jennifer is an inspiring, compassionate gardener. It is a wonderful walk in woods. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to research those plants. You've got tons of books you can use, sites you can go to. Try and go to as many native nurseries, as many native gardens as you possibly can. We just want to show you a few more native plants. I could go on forever. We would actually like to form a native plant group that we just talk about plants, because, you know, I had 40 some years to do this traditional stuff. I don't have 40 more to learn these native plants. So we need to be sharing what we can. These are just a few of these native plants. This is our garden. We have a ton of native pollinators. You got that hummer coming in. We've got butterflies. That's that Monarda fistuloso on the left there. That's the 5-footer that's in the sun. I've got a 3-footer that's not in as much sun. That is a beautiful plant. That's that hummingbird moth that finally came in for a landing. John and I have tons of pollinators and native plants. We have seen more swallowtails than ever, fritillaries, bees, all sorts of butterflies. There's that hummer sitting on my pagoda. That's a blue azure in the left-hand lower corner. It's on the anise hyssop. Pretty sure New Jersey tea is its host plant, which is just below it. And that's on the right-hand side. That's that St. John's, shrubby St. John's wort. It would take me another whole hour just to cover all the plants that all of us have so far. So you are all welcome to come to New York Mills and visit our gardens. They are a garden for all seasons. And I'm going to leave you with this quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer. When we see the world as a web of relationships, our ethics change. We begin to treat all beings with respect and gratitude, not just the beings we deem valuable or useful. Thank you. I hope you become a compassionate gardener, and I hope you plant a compassionate landscape. And join the wild ones. So I think, Krista, what do we do next? Take questions, or what would you like me to do?
I was thinking we could go ahead and draw in case people
Oh.
want to leave, and then
And-
we'll have time for questions.
We do have a raffle. We have a gift certificate for Wild Ginger Farms, which is in West Winfield. Am I right? Yeah. And then we also have a native shrub book. This is from Wild Seed Project. I've got 3 of their books. This is the native shrub. They have the ground cover and they also have the trees. I think they're out there. They're just wonderful. You need something to carry along with it. So can't look. Did everybody put their name in here? No? Does anybody want to put their name in?
It's okay.
Sure? Okay, here we go. This will be for the book. Vicky Ward. Vicky! There you go. And this is a gift certificate to a native nursery. She's new. She just started Wild Ginger Farm. She's in West Winfield. She has beautiful plants, all native. And let's see who gets that gift certificate. John Grossman. Well, there you go. Okay, does anybody have any questions? That was a lot of stuff in a short period of time. We would also be very happy to do presentations or just talks on a specific topic to do with native plants if you have a specific topic you need, because that would be.
Looks like you got a question.
I do. What is that?
Is there any way for me to find a female native bayberry shrub?
Bayberry shrub. So if you're going to be looking for native plants like that, and sometimes it's hard to find in the nurseries whether they're female or male. So a lot of the nurseries like Plantsman Nursery, and one nursery, I don't know if I'm supposed to plug anybody here, but yeah, it's where you might want to find it. Plantsman is near Ithaca. Wild Ginger Farm is in West Winfield. Olney's, even though it is a traditional nursery, does have straight species. There's also the fernery in Catskills. That is one of our favorites. So what I would say for finding a female, you're probably going to have to buy 2 or 3 of the plants. I would probably start it at the Plantsman and see, if you can get a female out of that. Sometimes you can tell because the berries are on it, but that's my take. I'm not really following this. I don't think I have them. So.
You can read the questions for you.
Okay.
And there's a question over here.
Oh, okay. First,
You showed a slide with the red flowers, and one was called cardinal. What was the second word of that?
here we go. Let's see. Oh, the cardinal flower?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in the, yeah. Yeah, let me, you want the,
Name of that cardinal red flower. In the beginning, yeah.
that one with the Hummer sticking his bill right in there. There we go. It's Lobelia cardinalis. Okay, does anybody else? There's 9 in the chat, so let me see. I don't know if I can get them. Well, just, oops, not like that.
Oh, so sorry.
Oh, are you do? I'm actually using
Okay.
that over there.
Okay, so. I think this is the first one, and you can just like go.
Okay. Huh. Lilacs are apparently not native. What would you do? Eliminate, just not plant? So a lot of people say to me, do I have to get rid of every single plant I own? No, because you're gonna do more harm than good. You're gonna, expose your soil, plus, wildlife is using those plants as habitat. And if they're really special to you, no. What we try to say is use about 70, try and get your gardens to 70% native. And you're like, well, how do I figure that out? Well, it's more by mass. It's not by 70% of my plants. Well, if you've got that massive oak, but you know, that massive oak, you know, is working in there. As John says, Maggie, you get a lot of points for that oak, don't you? I said, I do. I get a lot of points for the oak. You know, would you cut down your lilacs? Now, if you're talking a whole lilac hedge, I might take a few of them out and put in, you know, some natives. But if it's just one lilac, I wouldn't cut it down if it's that close to your heart. If it is not that close to you, you can put in, you know, like an arrowwood viburnum or some other, I guess it's totally up to the person. Go ahead.
We're trying to replant our whole yard with natives, and
That's what we're doing too.
you got a huge like section of honeysuckle along a creek that are replaced with like buttonbush and elderberries.
Yeah.
What if to try to avoid using herbicides? What's the best way to get rid of that? To just cut it down and then keep like
You
going
can,
back and trying to move it? Or?
you can try to keep cutting it down. That's gonna take longer. You can actually yank it, put a chain on that and yank them out. Which depends if you're that close to the creek, you know, you don't want stuff to get into the creek, but you can keep cutting it down. You know, and do the best you can, but yeah, I don't use chemicals. So I would, you know, maybe try and rip them actually out. But if you're gonna do that, I would plant immediately when you do that, so that, you know, to stabilize that soil.
Are there such things as native shrubs?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, where'd that book go? Oh, yeah, we've got tons of native shrubs. Yeah, I mean, like, we have winterberry, we happened to luck out that we had planted winterberry when we first did our plantings about 30-some years ago. They are native, they're good size, and I like the idea of, like I said, put canopy trees, understory trees, those herbaceous, I mean, the shrubs. You almost are creating a hedgerow or like bed and border, because I love beds and borders. But yeah, there are a ton, like just mentioned a button bush. There are tons of native shrubs. In all those books that you see, you're gonna see a lot of native shrubs. Beautiful, just great.
This just may sound silly, but do you have to check yourself for ticks every time you go in the house? Because we're besieged by ticks.
Yeah, we have a lot of deer. I live right in the village of New York Mills, but we have like 9 deer that are just hanging out back. I am so fair skinned that I cover myself a lot because I can't have the sun on me. But I can't say I'm good enough that I check all the time, but I do check myself. I'm not gonna not go out in the garden because of the ticks.
Right.
But I do check myself a lot. Yeah, it's not a crazy question. It's, you know, when it first started, I was like, holy Lord, I'm out there a lot, you know, so it's not a silly question.
I've planted a lot of fruiting bushes, and I need help with ground cover around them. So we were fighting off this 3rd acre where we ripped out a hedgerow and we just tried to plant some natives and fruit. A lot of it I wanted to feed us.
Sure.
So what are some recommendations for ground cover that's relatively quick and inexpensive, be it quicker coming from seed or something like that?
You can do some from seed. What I would do for ground cover is I would try to get plugs. There was one other thing that I didn't mention when someone asked where would you get stuff from. If you can, I love to use local first. So I would try and go to the local nurseries. Like, I don't know if you're in sun or shade or what kind of soil you'll
Mostly
have.
sun.
If it's sun, there's all sorts of different ground covers. There's actually a ground cover book as well. But if you can't find something local, which I think at Ginger Farms you would be able to find at local, I'm actually gonna use Pekora. It's Jennifer, help me with the
Groundswell.
yeah, the gold groundswell. It blooms yellow. That's one you could use in the sun. But, you know, there's sedges, there's all sorts of ground covers that you can use. Pear and strawberry, depends, you know, on your soil conditions. There is a wild seed project, has a nice ground cover book. That's really nice. But plugs would be good, because, and you can use, plugs are, you know, when you see like, it's like, wow, look, I can get all those plants. You see the little teeny, trays of like 72 or something. Some nurseries will sell it by the plug, some nurseries won't. They're a very small plant and you're like, oh, small plant, but you can plant a lot of them and their roots take right off. So, planting with plugs is really nice. The one thing, if you can't get somebody locally that will sell you plugs, you can go on to that Prairie Moon site, in Prairie. They do sell by plugs, but I'm gonna plug my local nursery first, and I really like to use the locals first. Alyssa at Ginger Farms just started her business. She might be, you know, conducive to doing plugs. And you can always, like you said, can I start from seed? Of course you can, yeah. You know, you save yourself money if you have time to do that and the patience to. I don't have time.
A lot of what you're talking.
And thank you, because you also have been a huge help in our native garden movement, so thank you very much.
So a lot of what you're talking about is converting gardens. Converting lawns is a much bigger challenge. And I think your description of covering with cardboard and so forth is fine on a small scale. But if you're dealing with large scale, I don't know how you can avoid tilling without trying to turn it to get the grass over. If you've got a lot of grass to start with, there are more challenges, even though what I'm doing in my own backyard is I'm trying to convert to a meadow, not just a garden.
Right,
but
with a meadow.
And yet to get rid of the grass takes significant effort.
Well, we did, and we have about a quarter of an acre and we have no grass almost. And we did convert, maybe not as large as meadow, but close. We converted a large area in the fall. I put a double layer of newspaper, put organic material and mulch down, and the next spring, it was gone. Your grass will die fast. Don't forget, most grass is being fertilized, needs fertilizer, you know, need water, air, sun. We killed ours in a very short period of time. And it was with newspaper and mulch, basically. It was actually organic material. Jennifer wants to,
Yeah, I just wanted to add, for creating meadows, there are a number of books out on that table, that are good resources. One of them is Garden Revolution. I have some sources on our Wild Ones website about creating meadows, turning grass. If you are out somewhere in the country where it hasn't been developed, it's not necessarily turf grass has been planted, you just want to go more native, there's a mowing regime you can use that will eventually turn you back into primarily native. If you are in a suburban area, you know, there are a variety of methods you can do. One is just do it incrementally. But even if you don't want to do it incrementally, there are various ways to do that. Benjamin Vogt, who Maggie talked about, his book Prairie Up talks about that as well. So there are a number of resources, and some are more or less labor intensive, depending on how fast and how native you want to do.
Does the meadow ever get to the point where you don't have to kind of treat it like a hayfield and mow it twice a year, or?
Yes, but
Yeah,
not,
that's what years.
actually, so it, again, it depends a little on the conditions. We're in the Northeast, here, everything basically like fresh. So usually, once you get to a point where you have the natives you want, the idea is to mow once every 3 years, or every year mow a third. So that keeps the shrubs from coming in, if you're mowing a third of it, so But you're also allowing 2/3 of it to overwinter, so insects that overwinter in that meadow.
I worked on a project years ago, and as part of the mitigation, we had to address migratory birds. And so we actually, with DEC, bought an area near a wildlife refuge that was all grassland. And in order to keep it grassland, so that, like Jennifer said, and it was like 200 acres. Like Jennifer said, we had a maintenance regime that I think it was every 2 or 3 years. More than likely they did what Jennifer said, mow a third of it at a time every year. But that was built in there so that for those migratory birds, that stayed as a grassland. So it's talking about the same thing, keeping it as meadow, because if you don't, you know, brush starts and then you won't be able to keep it under control. I have not done a meadow. I would like to do a meadow. I'd like to do a whole forest.
How do you know the plants that get along? Is it just in the research or?
Yeah, I was gonna actually include a slide, but it was like getting to be too lengthy and it was very complicated. Benjamin Boat just had a really good webinar on the sociability of plants. And plants are actually rated for their competitiveness, how they're formed, are they clumped, how do they spread, Grimes triangle. Some of my fine gardening magazines are out there. It's a traditional gardening magazine, but they are starting to add stuff about native plants because we're getting to be so popular in that movement. But he talks about how plants are competitive and not competitive. But also what you see out in nature that gets along with each other. And there are some, you know, we have some examples that, like the one I showed you, you know, and you'll also see sometimes, I know you're gonna go, thought she said she's native garden. Purple coneflower and black-eyed Susans, there is a native black-eyed Susan. And some of the plants you see that are always together are because one's not taking over the other. So.
How many years back do they go when they're researching what plants are native and what plants grow?
I knew somebody was gonna ask me that question.
Because some of us live on property that's very old,
Right,
and these are established, like we have like woods around our houses, you know.
right.
And we have ground cover that, you know, I saw where it said Vinca is not native, but I mean, and we have so much shade. If you go in our backyard, underneath all the trees, there's just, you know, it's covered with beautiful Vinca with blue flowers, like,
Yeah.
how much would go about, you know, to me, that seems like it would be native because it's been there.
So it's not native. It could be considered invasive. It is a monoculture. Vinca is not a native plant. And that's why when I said try to go back into nature, try to find yourself forest lands that are still intact. Meaning, is not got the forest cover in one plant, you know, it's got an intact native plant. But just, people have asked me, what is a native plant and how far do you go back in order to say that that thing's native? I say that it has not been human introduction. Humans did not introduce it. It did not come over. So it's pre-colonization, basically. That's what Don Leopold from ESF, I just listened to him and he was very exact. He said there is no question about it. No subjectivity here. It is pre-colonization. Not gonna say that. You know, if you're like, is it plant native? Is it not native? Again, I would, you know, we're in ecoregion 83. Some people say you can go down even lower and do just your county. You know, we're kind of new at this. I'm just going with my ecoregion 83. We're also 83S. And I will go off that list and use those the best I can. Sometimes, you know, I might use one that's in the Northeast. I'd like to use straight species I can't say that I'm so, stuck on the fact that I can't use a plant that's a little outside of the county region or whatever. I don't know if I answered your question, but, I will say that Vinca is not. Jennifer did take Vinca out of her yard, and I have had to take Vinca out, and it is a constant pull and remove, and pull and remove until it just gives in. Go ahead.
A comment kind of along what you're talking about. Because you're looking for plants that have developed that relationship with insects and wildlife and other plants. You're looking at a time scale of thousands to tens of thousands of years
Yeah.
for evolution to create those relationships, not 100 years
Yeah.
for when the plants
Right.
are there.
It might be a long time for us, but it ain't a long time for them. Yeah, they need that sufficient time to develop an essential and a relationship that they co-evolved together. So that when this plant comes out, this pollinator comes out. I hope that makes some sense. Go ahead, Rachel.
I just wanted to say really quickly, I'm subject to non-native plants and ticks, which you who were going out the door just raised. If any of you have Japanese barberry in your yards, which you might if it was traditionally landscaped, it's sort of a favorite non-native shrub among traditional landscapers. That plant specifically harbors ticks. So if you have it, take it out. Yes, thank you very much. Japanese barberry, it's very popular and it's everywhere.
If they're brown,
Landscapers put it in everywhere and it's like a tick habitat shelter city.
yeah, it's that brown, it's got thorns on it. It's that brown roundy thing that they stick in all, that stamped landscapes that we see everybody has, the plants don't touch. I remember my neighbor when we first started, the other neighbor goes, Maggie, think you can help? The other neighbor goes, yeah, but don't let your plants touch like hers. So. It's just supposed to. It's above ground, below ground. Well, thank you very much. This has been.
Hi, I am a landscape designer who's eventually come to the native plant decisions. But I have to say the question of,
Around here.
I'm from Clinton, yes.
Oh, good.
The